So welcome to this episode of the HRD Talks, where we talk to HR directors and people directors about their journey into HR, get their insight into current trends in the world of work, and take their advice on the future of HR and how HR professionals can deliver value and progress their careers. And today I'm really excited to welcome Neil Morrison, Group HR Director at Severn Trent, to the podcast. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So, Neil, tell us about Severn Trent to start with. It's maybe an organisation people will have heard of, I would think, a water company, but share a bit more about how that company operates and the size and scale of it.
Yeah, so Severn Trent is one of the regional water and wastewater companies. We're a FTSE listed business, FTSE 50. Employ around 9,000 people across the East Midlands, West Midlands. And we are responsible for essentially providing clean drinking water and taking people's wastewater away, treating that and putting it back into the environment. So lots of engineers, lots of operational staff, lots of customer contact staff, but also a whole range of other areas that, you'd have in pretty much any other business as well.
Yeah, makes sense. And you've been there how long?
So I joined about 6.5 years ago. Time has flown. I think that COVID period probably for many of us kind of took a period of time out of our lives that it suddenly feels like you're counting many more years than you thought you'd actually served. But 6.5 years I've been there. Yeah.
And you have a big team for 9,000 people?
So I look after the HR teams, but I also have got all the communication teams as well.
Yeah.
So internal comms, press office, media marketing. Across all of those, there's about 200 people that look after that. So yeah, pretty sizable team.
Yeah, brilliant. Tell us about your kind of journey through your career in HR and how you ended up at Severn Trent. Where did you start out? First job?
So I graduated in psychology.
Yes.
And
all the best people did.
Isn't it a great degree, right?
I would say so.
And the time I did it, it wasn't very popular. Whereas now you have to be super bright to get on and study it. Whereas I could be a thickie and get away with it. So I came out of that and broadly, I didn't want to do any further study. So wanted to go into work. Someone recommended what was called the IPM then, or the CIPD as people know it now.
Yep.
I did that, and my first job was Dartford and Gresham NHS Trust.
Okay.
And it was working on the first new build PFI hospital in the UK. So probably taught me a lot of things that I'm not doing and didn't want to do ever again.
Okay.
But brilliant experience and a really great HR director who was super enthusiastic. And I did that for about 18 months and then went to work for Rentokil. So I went from public sector into, at that time, probably the most private sector commercial organisation you could possibly get to.
Yes.
So Sir Clive Thompson was the CEO. It was called Mr. 20% growth year on year. It was really fast paced, working up and down the country. And I did that again for about 2 years. And then I got a call from a headhunter about a role with Argos. Mm-hmm. And at that time, kind of my memories of Argos were pretty grey, kind of like a betting shop environment, kind of, you'd get your Christmas catalogue. It was always a little bit intimidating going into the shop because it didn't feel like a normal place. And they were going on a big kind of transformation. So, everything was being rebranded into turquoise and pink and purple. and I thought, this sounds really exciting. Big plans for growth. And I spent the first proper chunk of my career there for about 8.5 years.
Okay.
Absolutely phenomenal. Just really good place to cut my teeth.
Yep.
Very fast paced. HR teams were really focused on customer, driving value, productivity, efficiency. I'm got to work in generalist and specialist areas, got to work in Ireland. I set up the first e-commerce team in the UK, I think it was, probably.
Yeah.
You can remember, it used to be, when I joined there, it was called Ring and Reserve, and then it became Text and Take Home. And by the time I left, it was Click and Collect, right? So that shows the kind of digital progression. Absolutely phenomenal time, really loved it there. But I probably wasn't going to get the top job.
Okay.
Got a call again saying, it's a bit obscure, this one, but how do you feel about talking to us about Random House? And I didn't really know the brand that well. I think we know a lot of the kind of sub-brands in Random House, which is a publishing house, things like Vintage, for example, people would know. And this was pre-Kindle, pre-iPad. And I thought, oh, cool. This is either going to be really, really successful in this digital world, or it's going to explode. And I've never seen a business explode before. And that'd be quite a good experience, wouldn't it? And so I went to work at Random House, and the advent of Kindle, the advent of iPad, digital publishing, digital marketing was just really, really exciting.
Yeah.
Working with brilliant, talented people. And then 2012, the CEO came to see me and said, "Oh, there's this talk that we might buy Penguin." And I was like, "That's pretty cool, isn't it?" You know, I thought London Olympics had gone to the head a little bit, but kind of went on holiday for a couple of weeks, came back, and we were doing a deal. And that saw the kind of global merger of Penguin and Random House, which I worked on for a number of years, integrating those businesses in Australia and India and New Zealand and in the UK, and really, really kind of one-off opportunity. You don't get to do that stuff very much. But in 2017, I think it was kind of post-Brexit, and I'd really seen this divide between London and parts of the southeast, which were really quite privileged, quite wealthy, and other parts of the UK where people were feeling like things are pretty tough, pretty hard. And I thought, I want to go and try and create good work outside of London. You know, and I got approached by Severn Trent, and you know, the rest is history. 6.5 years later, there I am still.
Yeah. Great. It's a great story. And how would you contrast your current organisation and somewhere like Penguin Random House?
I think what's different about somewhere like Severn Trent is that often we're recruiting in areas where there aren't a lot of jobs. And so the jobs that we're providing are really important to the individuals, to their families, to the local communities, in terms of paying a good wage, job security, you know, a pension that you can retire on, you know, payment if you're sick, and looking after people. So, you know, publishing was quite different in that people felt almost that we were lucky to employ them, and that, you know, they'd come from Red Brick University, Russell Group, Oxford and Cambridge. And so there was a little bit of entitlement sometimes, I think, you know, in those kind of organisations, where in Severn Trent, you see a lot of kind of traditional, what I would say is paternalistic kind of employment, which actually I think is not a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing to get, is organisations that look after their workforce. And a workforce that feel loyal to the organisation, because they do that. It's like the kind of basis of the psychological contract, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly Severn Trent do a lot of that sort of thing. So we were talking earlier about the sort of societal strategy and that kind of thing. So share with us a bit around that.
Yes, so I guess we're in a privileged position, and you know, the sector's, you know, is not without media criticism. You might have noticed just the odd article or two
every now and again.
Yeah, quite. But you know, one of the things is we're in a privileged position because we are a regulated monopoly, and so customers have no choice whether they come to us for their water and wastewater services. And we do a lot in terms of employment. So in my time, we've grown from 5,000 employees to 9,000, will be 10,000 next year, by insourcing, by making sure that, you know, we're providing good quality jobs. But one of the things that we recognised was there were lots of parts of our community where, you know, unemployment rates were significantly higher than national average. Number of people leaving school and going not into education, employment, or training was significantly higher. And so what we wanted to look at was, how could we use all the great capability that we have to try and improve the outcomes for people who wouldn't necessarily come to work for us, but might go and work for someone else? And how do you get a coalition of employers together who all want to do the same thing in order to benefit the region? And so we set a 10-year target to take 100,000 people out of poverty in that period of time, through either direct employment or through creating employment opportunities in the region for them. So it's a pretty bold, if I'm honest, target. It's a pretty long-term target. We're starting to do some work. So we started one program in East Birmingham. one program in Derby. We've got a third one opening in Coventry, which is our place-based approach. So working in particular communities to really get under the skin of the things that are preventing people from reaching their potential, and working with community groups to say, how can we help that, rather than telling them. And then the second one is looking at particular groups of people. So we're working with young offenders who are leaving young offenders institutes in the region. So their employment prospects are absolutely awful when you look statistically, and saying, how can we help them with work experience, mentoring, training to give them a better chance of getting into employment. And then the next piece we're looking at there is care leavers, because again, the data around care leavers is pretty problematic. So yes, all of these pieces adding up over 10 years.
And will you track that in some way in terms of the success of that?
Yes, so we're looking at measuring it in two ways. One is in terms of number of people. So we recognise in order to get 100,000 people out of poverty, we need to interact with significantly more than 100,000 people and be able to do that. And the second one is a measure of social value, so a pound notes measure of social value, using the government methodology, the TOM methodology, to try and measure that, to again be able to say, so here's the number of people and here's the pound notes value that we've added during that period of time.
Yeah. No, that's great. That sounds fantastic. One of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about, well, a number of things, were around sort of topical issues of the day. And as well as starring on podcasts, I know that you write a fair bit, blogs and the like. And also, I think for the last 8 years, you've been ranked as HR Magazine's HR most influential for quite some time. And I definitely enjoy, reading your take on the world of work. So I thought we maybe chat about some of that stuff. One of those areas it often comes up is the future of work.
Yeah.
And almost a bit of crystal ball gazing to a certain extent. What's your take on the future of work?
It's interesting. HR most influential is like kind of best turnip in the local fair, isn't it? Someone used that line relating to something else this week, so I've stolen it. But so I don't think there is one single future of work. And I think this is probably where we drink the Kool-Aid a little bit, is that we try and suggest that everything is kind of like homogenous. So there's a lot of debate at the moment around AI and people talking about that and the impact of the workforce. But if you actually start to segment it and look at which professions are most likely to be impacted by AI in the short term, it tends to be knowledge workers.
Yeah.
It tends to be, people traditionally working in offices. So you might be Toast.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil.
You're welcome. I'm just predicting the future, right? It doesn't necessarily look at people like retail, hospitality and leisure or logistics or my workforce. And so I think we've got to get better at kind of going, so what does the future look like for them? How do we create a future that is equitable for different parts of the workforce rather than just focusing on one group? And you saw this, kind of post-pandemic, everyone's like, you can work wherever you want. That's the future. Or we're going to all go hybrid. And of course, if you're, in my workforce, 60% of my workforce have to work in their place of work.
Yeah.
Right? If you're in retail, hospitality and leisure, you need to be in your place of work. If I'm going into hospital for surgery, I don't want my surgeon working from home. So we kind of buy into these myths about it a little bit. And I think what it means is we don't think enough about, your delivery driver who's on a 0 hours contract, who has to own their own van, who gets penalised if they don't deliver on time, or the person who's on a 0 hours contract working in hospitality who doesn't know which shifts they'll be doing week from week. So what's the future of work look like for them, and what should it look like for them? And that's what I'd like us to spend more time thinking about and less time thinking about, probably a kind of privileged elite, if I'm totally honest.
Yeah. Makes sense. And you mentioned AI. Excited by that? Scared by that? Bit of both?
So I think the different thing about AI is the pace of change that it's likely to move at. But as I mentioned, I was kind of at Argos when e-commerce came in and everyone said physical retail's going to die, it's all going to be online. That's not proven to be the case. I was in publishing when digital publishing came on and everybody said that's the death of the physical book. And that's not proven to be the case. So I think, we need to see it as a huge opportunity for business to look at the best way of combining people and technology. And humans are incredibly adaptable. They manage technology incredibly well. If you walk around the street and you see the way that people interact with mobile phones, nobody's put them on a training course to do that. But what I do think it means is, as kind of people professionals, we need to be looking at workforce planning in a much more advanced way than we perhaps have done in the past, to understand how do we redeploy, reskill, retrain people, rather than suddenly going, oh, we're going to make a whole bunch of people redundant, and then push that problem onto society to say, well, you've got to deal with that now. It's kind of responsible business is about making sure we minimize that in the same way that we'd look at minimizing our carbon impact. I think is taking that kind of approach.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then one of the other things that we spoke about briefly earlier on was the tendency these days to fall into a kind of groupthink mentality, I think, as you described it, when it comes to maybe fads in the world of work, or, a bit like the hybrid thing. Well, we must all now decide that everybody must be able to work from anywhere. And you had some interesting thoughts around that. And in fact, I think you've written about the, bringing your whole self to work type theory, or not, as you were suggesting. But unpack that for us.
So I think, often there's a lack of confidence both in the people profession, but also I think in corporate businesses overall, where people try and kind of, if you stay in the pack, and if you do the same as everyone else, you're not going to get criticized. And I think that's what you saw a little bit kind of post-pandemic, is organizations would come out and make a proclamation, and then everybody would look at them and go, crikey, we should probably do the same. And now what you're seeing is a reversal of that, and people saying, we're now going to say everybody's got to be back in, and everyone else is kind of copying that. And that's weird. It's kind of weird behavior, because we wouldn't normally approach things like that in business. You'd look at the evidence, you'd look at the data, you'd look at the business case, you'd get a proper strategy around it, you'd maybe do some trials, you'd test things, then you'd look at rolling out. And so when it comes to people, quite often we don't take that same sort of rigor. So you saw it there, you saw it, with a lot of the kind of moments in the past, whether it's Black Lives Matters, or whether it's Me Too, and organizations feeling like they had to jump into something and say something without necessarily thinking it through and thinking, what's my track record in this space and what should I do? And I think increasingly we're going to see it in this EDI space, which I don't think we've thought enough about our end goal in terms of some of the conversations that are now creeping into the work.
Yep.
And so the article I was writing was broadly saying there are some topics where there is no single correct view.
Yes.
And therefore, if you open up that debate in work, you've either got to expect the division that comes with that, or you've got to say this is not a debate that we think is right to entertain in work. And we've seen that, in the debate about trans rights. We saw it a little bit in terms of Brexit. We have a situation, obviously, with Palestine and Israel at the moment, where there are very strong views on both sides, and different groups can feel, incredibly vulnerable if there's a conversation that they don't feel they've got a voice in. So I worry that we've taken social policy from outside of work and brought it into work, and we're not equipped to properly deal with those.
Yes.
So a more progressive way might be to say we want to create inclusive workplaces where everyone feels safe, everyone feels recognised, everyone feels that they can contribute and perform to the best of their ability. But we also accept that there's some conversations that we don't have at work because it's not right for those conversations to be had, because that will only create tension and unrest and unhappiness. And so if you want to create a safe place for work, then you're better off not having it. It's like, it's like a kind of, on a macro scale, the conversations you don't have at Christmas, right? Because that it's, auntie or uncle or brother or father or whoever it is just going to go off on a deep end if you talk about it. Maybe that's a healthier way of managing work.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that is quite counter to a lot of the current noise or thinking, in the HR profession, I think. How does that sit with you in terms of your view around that?
And I think this comes back to the point, I don't think necessarily we've thought through the end game on this. I was struck by a comment that Salman Rushdie made. And if anyone knows about kind of being cancelled or kind of, the difficulty of having an opinion. It's Salman Rushdie. And he made a comment, I heard a couple of years ago where he said, the moment you ban one idea, you allow for all ideas to be banned. And so if you believe that, and I think I probably do, then you've got to ask, do I want all ideas to be espoused in the workplace? And I probably don't. So either I have to censor and I have to say these views are okay, but those views aren't, in which case I'm social engineering and I'm deciding what my workforce need to think or feel or say, and recognizing the HR profession probably comes from a slightly different demographic to most of their workforces.
Yes.
Or you have to say, we have to have a clean space where those things don't come in. And I think the current EDI agenda hasn't thought through the necessary end game of where this ends up. And so you've got lots of organizations pushing for kind of radical candor and, self-expression. And
yes.
But without thinking, well, what happens if someone self-expresses in a way that other people find offensive? How do we manage that? So I think we've got to have a reset, and that doesn't mean that it's not about being inclusive, and it doesn't mean that it's not about having a diverse workforce. It's very, very different to saying I can have a diverse workforce. I can create a space where everyone can feel included, but I don't need to have certain conversations at work that I think might cause division or upset.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think in my world, where some of those issues are played out in an employment tribunal, where then an employment judge is effectively judging, well, I talk very regularly about the battle of rights, those protected characteristics that are butting up against each other. Even in that judicial process, it feels difficult, for those judges to think, well, which am I going to prefer in this situation? Because that work situation has resulted in those things butting up against each other. And I guess that would help prevent some of that too, potentially, what you were describing.
I think so. And I think, it's also around there will be the explicit cases that get as far as that. But there's also a sense of, and I hear this kind of more informally amongst the workforce, of feeling like I'm being told what I should think or I should feel or I should believe about a subject. And that's not great in terms of engagement and productivity and performance. And so I think it would help definitely in terms of those more extreme cases when you get two equally valid but opposing views coming out. But also it's that sense of, I think, impinging into people's lives, that sort of creep into people's personal philosophy, their ability to have freedom of thought, which I think is probably problematic as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. Are there any other sort of trends or topics in the HR profession at the minute that are kind of on your agenda a lot of the time?
I think if you think about the societal work that we're doing, and I think, some of the AI piece that we've talked about as well, I think, what joins that together is that kind of sense of what's a business's role in society. And, I'm a capitalist. I run a FTSE 50 business. So, we have to deliver shareholder value. And I'm unapologetic about that, because that's the way in which we raise capital, and the way in which we can invest, and the way we can do, improvements to infrastructure and networks and the environment. But I think you can do that and say, but what's a fair deal for society as well as that? And what should we be doing? And society is your workforce, but it's also your supply chain, and it's the people in and around your communities. And I think there's a real challenge for people, professionals, to be looking at that, the horrible ESG, but the kind of S in ESG, and going, what really is that? It isn't a few days painting fences or having a D&I policy. It's about, social impact in the same way that you look at environmental impact. And if you look at the progression from the environment from, it used to be zero to landfill, that's what businesses did. And then they were like, oh, now we move on, and now we're into, scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions and net zero. I think we need to advance our thinking on the societal piece in that same way and start to really be thinking about how do we create positive social impact in organisations and use properly earned profit to invest back into kind of society and communities. I think that is a debate that we need to have more of. And I think, the profession could really grab hold of that and do a really brilliant piece of work.
Yeah. So, and this is probably a more difficult question in the context of the criticism that the sector has come under. How do you navigate that well?
Yeah. So I mean, the sector has faced a amount of criticism over the last couple of years, and I think there is nothing wrong with having a good quality debate about the kind of services that we want and how we want them to be funded and what we think performance should be. I think the debate has fallen short of a good quality debate, if I'm totally honest, which doesn't mean that one isn't the right thing to have. It's just having it in a more informed, more kind of data-driven, balanced way around what do we want our future of our water and wastewater system to look like?
Yeah.
What does that mean in terms of water scarcity, in terms of extreme weather events that we're having, in terms of urban regeneration and green spaces in areas which have become concreted, just up the road from where we are. We've got a brilliant program in Mansfield where we're putting in green space into the town in order to reduce flooding because everything's been concreted over. So that is kind of debates, I think, are really, really important. I think they've been subsumed, if I'm honest, by campaigners who are trying to drive a particular agenda, and that's their job to do that. And they've done it incredibly well. But I think if you are talking to customers, for us, it's about showing the evidence points that the work we're doing for the environment, the work we're doing in their local communities, the number of people that we're employing, the cost of their bill relative to other services or other parts of the world. If you're a Severn Trent customer, your average daily bill is £1.15 a day. Now that's for pretty much as much water and as much wastewater as you want. Now we all know that wouldn't buy you half a coffee, so we need to have those sensible debates. And I think we're genuinely up for that. But I think sometimes it gets positioned as a kind of cartoon sort of pantomime villain kind of routine. Sure. And I don't think that just helps anyone get the future better for the next generation, the generation after that. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And talking about the next generation, let's move on to the next generation of HR professionals. So one of the kind of purposes of the podcast is to talk about that and the state of the profession, perhaps advice for people who might be considering career in HR. A few of my guests have said, don't do it. I don't think you'll say that from our chat already. But what would your advice be? It definitely wouldn't be don't do it. Yeah. I think, we have a ridiculously privileged role in business in that we touch on every single part of it. I'm privy to conversations about pretty much every part of our operation on a daily basis. And not many people can say that. And I think the profession has a real role to do that. I think two things I'd say. One, in terms of your managing career, and the second one in terms of approach. In terms of managing your own career, I would firmly encourage people in the profession to move, if they can, between functions and areas. So get some reward expertise, get some business partnering expertise, go and understand what succession planning and talent management looks like. Because if you want to do, the number one job, you need to know enough of all of those parts to be able to knit them together and give the kind of overall architecture. And the second one in terms of approach comes back to the point I was making, which is being really evidence-based. Look at your workforce, look at your workforce data, look at the external demographic data, look at, your workforce planning and your future trends, and ground everything in data and proper sort of analysis, assessment and thinking. And if that leads you to a place that says, I'm not going to follow the latest trend, so be it, right? You're there to run a good business. You're not there to kind of show everybody that you're with the latest kind of vibe. That's not what you're employed to do.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. One of the other things that we have is something called the supplier shout out. So that's generally a supplier or a third party that you'd like to recommend or big up on the podcast. Anybody that springs to mind on that front?
Oh, it feels quite dirty as a section, doesn't it? There's no money involved in this, I promise. So I'm going to talk about Peakon, actually. And Peakon is an employee engagement provider. And, there's lots of debates around employee engagement. And there's lots of debates around kind of the right way to measure it and whether you should measure it or not. And, put those to one side a little bit. Why I really like this is for our managers, it gives them real-time feedback from their employees about how they feel about a various number of topics and the ability to enter into conversations with them. And we moved to Peakon a number of years ago. And since that point, we've really driven kind of our employee satisfaction and happiness through it. We've got an employee net promoter score of 65. So, ranging from 100 to minus 100. I'm pretty happy with that. And it's just been really brilliant in terms of giving the speed, the pace, the quality of the data to managers to be able to have those conversations. And so that's why I choose them, because it's just been phenomenal for us in making work better. And that's what I want to do.
Yeah, great. Linked to that, how do you approach employee engagement as a concept? Again, it's a real buzz kind of topic at the minute. What kind of steps do you take to, I know we're measuring it that way, but to improve that side of work?
So I think most of it comes down to micro actions between a manager and an employee. I think trying to do big organizational employee engagement strategies is probably not going to drive it in the same way. So there'll be infrastructure pieces, whether that's pay benchmarking or whether that's career progression that might need some sort of overarching corporate strategy. But the biggest value comes from individuals, teams and managers sitting down and going, so what are we going to do about this? And I kind of always say, these are your engagement scores. They're not mine. So if as a team you're unhappy, then sit down and have a conversation about what is it that would make you happier and how could you do that? Rather than, throwing up and looking at it on the floor and going, well, there you go, there's a mess, isn't it? So for me, it's those individual pieces. And I think, you have all those things about people join a company and they leave a manager and all these kind of sayings. But I do think line managers are the absolute unsung heroes in organizations who can turn teams from being kind of underperforming to absolute superstars. Because everybody comes to work to do a good job. Nobody really comes to work to kind of skive or get away with it. We all want to come and do a good job, and a manager can really create and connect into that and drive it. And they're the key to employee engagement.
Yeah. So how do you support them? So again, that comes up in my world quite a bit, where, managing performance or disciplinary issues, but ideally you'd get to those managers and upskill them and support them in doing that management piece well before any of that messy stuff happens. How do you best create that great manager?
I think HR teams need to stay away from processes as much as they can. And I know, talking to a lawyer, that's like saying, you should sell your grandmother, isn't it? It's kind of, but I guess what do I mean by that is sometimes the process gets in the way of what's actually going on. So before getting into it, I'd always start the conversation with the manager that was saying, what's going on, right? What's happening? Because often they will know the answer that they want to get. They just feel that they've been given a set of tools that don't necessarily get the answer. And so they don't apply them properly, or they don't know what they're doing with them. They have a bad conversation. If I look across Severn Trent, one of the things that I am immensely proud of is the quality of our managers. And they haven't been through some management training. They're just really kind of sentient human beings who work with their teams and who know them. They know their family. They know their history. They know what they've been through in the past. They want to help them be better in the future. They've often worked together for a long period of time. So support them on a human to human level.
Yep.
And where it doesn't go wrong, where that's not working, we can then coach and guide them with the process to help them light touch, put that over the top. But I think it starts in that human to human relationship. And I know that, you'd never want that as a kind of in your witness pack, would you? You're kind of, we were having a human to human conversation. We didn't write any of it down, but that is the reality of it.
It's the real world, isn't it?
Don't get to the point where it is a problem. Kind of have the conversation early.
And then one of the other things that we obviously referenced earlier on was that you studied psychology. How much of that still comes through in what you're doing? You're talking about, human to human and that kind of thing. Does that still influence what you're doing?
I think as a mindset, yes. So I think definitely as a kind of, recognizing that people will behave in a certain way based around a number of external factors, how they're treated, what's going on in their life, how they're feeling, how they're spoken to, what they desire and want to achieve. And so I think, taking that kind of overarching psychological approach that says, I say that I'm there to help individuals, teams, and the organisation to perform to the best of their ability. If you want to do that, you need to understand what's going on in someone's mind a little bit. Yeah. But it isn't to the extent that I kind of, psychoanalyze or try, try and assess people or get overly concerned about it. But I think it is taking a human approach to performance and productivity rather than taking a kind of pounds note approach and kind of, I believe you get the pound note if you do the human piece. Yeah.
And I agree. I guess for me, it helps with my advice in the sense of think about how someone will feel about what you're about to do. That's the way I always, when talking to clients, it's that human impact piece, which I think sometimes gets lost, like you say, particularly with legal advice, where it's, this is the process and these are the risks. Well, actually, how do you manage this well, bearing in mind how people feel,
Exactly. And I'd add to that, sometimes, conversations go wrong and standing back and going, why did that conversation go wrong? Or why, I wonder what was going on when they spoke to me that way, actually can help you resolve something much, much quicker. It comes back to a previous point we were talking about, then digging in on a position and going, my position's right and their position's wrong. And, a manager that can go to an employee and say, no, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I just had some really bad news about our performance and it was weighing on my mind, or, I didn't get any sleep last night because, my baby was up and crying. Can de-escalate something really, really, really quickly. Yeah. Rather than digging in and kind of going, well, you shouldn't have reacted like that as an employee. Well, you shouted at me. Well,
Yes.
That kind of stuff just makes work better.
Yes. And I'm sure not enough of those conversations happen because managers think, I can't do that. I can't be vulnerable in that way, I suppose.
That's right. And, also, and say sorry. I guess we've all experienced kind of customer service going badly wrong. And when someone rocks up and says, I'm really sorry, that shouldn't have happened that way, you go, oh, that's okay. That's fine. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. I don't mind waiting 3 hours. That's perfectly fine. I shouldn't have taken up your time. Yeah. And it's not dissimilar in the workplace. If someone comes along and goes, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I got that wrong. Most people will say, oh, well, I didn't enjoy the experience, but I really, really value the fact that you've come and said sorry. Yeah. Now, it doesn't cost anything, does it? And if you can do that, then you can really get the best out of your team, I think. Yeah. And that sounds like a really positive way to bring our time to a close. Were there any sort of closing thoughts, Neil? I haven't primed you on that at all, but... No, I would just say if you are a people professional or you're thinking of being a people professional, we have a wonderfully privileged kind of opportunity to help people be their very, very best at work. And sometimes it can feel like you're under fire and you can feel like everything's, being directed at you, but don't listen to that and recognize every single day you've got the opportunity to make someone's life better. And if you do that, I think then, we create much, much better workplaces.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Neil. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast. Hopefully you found the discussion helpful. If so, please follow us on your podcast provider to be notified of future episodes and share with friends and colleagues. For more information on the podcast, please visit actons.co.uk/the HRD Talks.